YouTube show hosted by Davey, a self-proclaimed gamer who specializes in reviewing and showcasing affordable video games. 2 episodes enter the arena, 1 comes out victorious. Join hosts Joe and Kevin and a guest as they debate which should win the Batleth battle. Grab your popcorn as you listen to Cinema Z, a film discussion and review podcast showcasing films you probably missed, but should definitely check out. Hosted by Mark and Matt. Don your apron for The Food Replicator, where Matthew eats and drinks his way through the Star Trek cocktail and 3 cookbooks. Beam aboard Galaxy Class, a Star Trek Next Generation podcast covering all of TNG, hosted by Steven. In order to not repeat it, listen to History with the Zalagis, a snippet of historical events from around the world, hosted by Chrissy and Jason. For the newest Trek coverage, check out Infinite Diversity, hosted by Chrissy and Thad. Curl up with a good book and delve into Beta Canon with Peter, host of the online Trek Book Club on Twitter, and his new companion, Trek Book Club podcast. Test your Trek knowledge with Trexperts Quiz, a Star Trek quiz show hosted and written by Davey. Whether you're a member of Starfleet Federation or Planetary Union, go check out Union Federation, covering current Star Trek and the Orville, which we all know is really a Trek show, hosted by Kyle, Kevin, Amy, and Haley. Head over to YouTube and watch The View Screen live on Sundays, your Trek-inspired talk show hosted by Calvin and Amy, with Season 2 starting in September for a 10-week run. Spill the tea with Christos while he discusses current Trek news and events and explores the world of fandom via guest interviews, all with a LGBTQIA+ perspective on What's the Tea-Bab. And for our Patreon members, we have the Hive Mind with monthly script readings, Let's Fly, a Discovery reaction show, It's Green, a cornucopia of topics, Amy's Math Moments, a quick look at math moments in Star Trek. We know you have a choice of podcasts to choose from, and we thank you for listening to BQN. Assimilate the audio. You're listening to BQN. Assimilate the audio.
Hey there, welcome back everyone to the BQN Hive Mind presents the Prodigy panel. This is going to be part 3 of our Prodigy panel series, covering off the final 5 episodes of Season 2. For the uninitiated out there, the BQN Hive Mind is our regular program where we invite our community of network patrons and hosts to come aboard to discuss whatever's happening in Trek right now. And what else is happening in Trek right now but Prodigy? It's been out for a while, but hey, everyone's probably had a chance to watch it now, so it's a good time to talk through it. If you would like to be a part of a future BQN Hive Mind broadcast, you can sign up to be a network patron over at patreon.com/BQN. I am going to bring in my 2 co-hosts today. We've got Jonathan, aka Dirk Danger, and the return of the fabulous queen of the BQN podcast network, Miss Amy Nelson. Hello, both. How are we going?
Doing great.
Yes, so good. Finally to catch one of these Hive Minds. You've been having them, and I'm like, oh, I haven't had a chance to watch, but now I did binge watch, so it's still sort of a blur, but I'm pretty happy to be here because I've seen all of Prodigy now.
All right, so my first test is Amy. Do you know why my name is Dirk Danger?
No, I don't.
So the Doctor mentions his hollow novel is The Adventures of Dirk Danger and the Doom of Loom and Doom. He's got a way with names and words. So I felt I had to take advantage of the opportunity here tonight and come as Dirk Danger.
I love it. Perfect. Yes, his novels made a big splash.
Jonathan had to explain that to me before we went live as well, because I just assumed it was his OnlyFans name. So there you go.
And we all know he has one.
Oh,
I think I just made him blush.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You figured out how I pay for the Star Trek cruise now. Oh, boy.
So, Amy, what did you think of season 2? Because it's been a whirlwind.
It really has been. And I was very hesitant to start Prodigy. And I'm not sure if it was because I didn't have the pressure of, talking about it each week, because it was just all dumped. And I was sort of being stubborn, like, why would you do that? I want to, get it week by week so I have time to process. So it just seemed very difficult to get going. But then once I got going, it was a lovely, nice little bite size of story. Like, here's the one with Chakotay. Here's the one of getting this other. Like, they were just little bites. And then we get the big, ending, which is great. I loved how it ended. So I was expecting something more, I guess, along the line of Discovery, where it's just building all one big story. Yep. This one just seemed, smaller.
It was hard on us as fans having it all dropped at the one time like this. And we've talked about this on the last 2 panels as well. But Jonathan, are you for or against the dropping it all in one go?
Well, let's start off with the fact that we've never gotten Star Trek like this ever before, right?
Yeah.
Unless you were new to Star Trek, coming into it, as many people did during the pandemic and afterwards, and having that ability. This is the first time we've ever had Star Trek dropped, 10, 20 episodes at a time on us. And I do actually like having the ability to watch multiple episodes at a time, particularly when they're shorter episodes, like Prodigy is. I feel like you can get more of the story arc. I will say that this show shows a evolution of Star Trek over the time. It's gotten very cinematic in like the style of Discovery. There's a point at when I made a note here. I'm like, this is Discovery and the Lower Decks and the Matrix combined into one. Is what I felt like what we got in a lot of the season, and I thought it was really well done. The story comes full circle in a way we don't, normally get, especially with things kind of up in the air. Makes me wonder again, do they now write just assuming every season you write is probably maybe going to be your last, and you hope that you'll get extended for another, or was there something else that they knew behind that? And at one point I wrote down, I'm like, I feel like this is the storyline I didn't know I needed. It does a beautiful job of tying everything together in a way that I don't know that any other Star Trek maybe does quite so elegantly.
I hadn't even really kind of thought about it like that. I love that, this is the Star Trek story I did not know I needed, because it feels like almost universally the fandom is kind of united on this one. I've seen very little hate or criticism. I think I saw someone ranting on some random Facebook group the other day, going, I don't get it. Why does everyone like this show? Rah, rah, rah. And I'm like, but apart from that, everyone seems to love it. Amy, are you kind of picking up on that as well?
Yeah, I was just thinking, I feel like those who wanted to watch it did and enjoyed it, and those that didn't want to watch it didn't, and they're not saying anything negative, which normally we're used to all of the naysayers, whether they've seen it or not. Discovery haters, right? But with Prodigy, there seems to be this level of respect where it's like, well, I'm not going to say anything bad about it because I haven't seen it, and I'm okay not seeing it. And I love that we get that choice nowadays because everything is so different where it's like, oh, you don't want to watch Prodigy? Fine. We still love you as a Star Trek fan. And I don't think we had that before.
Yeah.
I'll say that I tried to find critiques on Prodigy, and I could only come up with two things. One, I'm not 100% sure this is for kids. Some of these storylines and everything that's going on, I'm like, I'm not sure that children will follow. I have no problem with children watching it. I think it's great morals and values, and hopefully they'd be able to follow on. But there's a lot of detailed oriented things, and certainly like there's a lot of Easter eggs that unless you're a hardcore Star Trek fan, you're going to miss out on. That I feel like that's one of the things they copy from Lower Decks is that they weave these things together so well, and small little things like even just hearing like there's a Ensign Tarsus, and I'm like, man, they pulled that name from TNG. I wonder if they were supposed to know about a backstory there and everything. The only other critique is I feel like there's some inconsistent animation. It looks great and amazing. The ships, many of the characters look amazing, and then there's a handful of characters that you're like, what happened here? They don't look quite the same, or they're a little inconsistent. But other folks, it's like it's amazing. Like the Doctor, I feel like they did him a little dirty. He does not look quite right. Something's off a little bit about him. But like hologram Janeway looks amazing. Admiral Janeway looks amazing. They do a good job of like an older Chakotay. The animation's amazing. There's just a few things that it's like a little inconsistent on the individuals that makes you wonder what happened there. But like that's all I could come up with, because like every story is really well written. Mm-hmm. The script is done to even choose specific phrases to make sure you are understanding and tied back into a specific episode if you are that hardcore fan. Like Wesley Crusher at one point says space, time, thought. That's word for word from the TNG episode.
Yeah.
Do you think that they made the entry point a little bit too steep for kids? Because it was, I can remember when they first announced it and Kate Mulgrew was announced as being on it, I saw a panel with her where she's like, oh, how wonderful to be able to bring young people into this universe with these values and ideals. I've been wondering, and I wonder what either of you might think of this, have they kind of gone for that almost like that, you know, Disney Pixar kind of model where they make it for kids, but they include references so the adults can sit comfortably alongside and watch? Or is the balance a little just more geared to the older fans there? Amy, what do you think?
Yeah, in listening to you talk, I'm thinking, okay, well, I was introducing this to my nieces, and Murph got the youngest one, like, oh, it's so cute, da da da. And then my oldest one was able to understand the complexities of the storyline. And then I'm loving it because I'm getting the deep cuts and, oh, this is a tie-in to Voyager and TNG and stuff like that. So I feel that it is very well written to cover the spectrum of ages. Yeah.
Jonathan, what about you?
Yeah, I think that's really well said. It is, at first I would say maybe it's written more for adults, but I'm understanding more of it than maybe, a kid would. And Pixar, I guess, would be a good example of this. They would do a lot of, it's mainly for kids, but then have adult references. If Amy's watching this with younger kids and they're following and enjoying it, then, they're obviously doing something right. I guess from my background and knowledge, I'm focusing more on all the different intricacies and tie-ins and the storyline in maybe a way that a kid isn't, but it's written so well that makes me think like this is not just for kids. There's definitely a change somewhere in the middle of like season 2 where I feel like the stories become a little bit more serious. Like the first episode here for the episode, what we're talking about, what is it? Ascension, I think is what it's called.
Mm-hmm.
That story of Z's self-sacrifice and like turning old, and like Lower Decks did a thing where they got older, but it was fun and lighthearted. This was painful and serious and dramatic, and I literally wrote down like, I'm like, this is for kids. I mean, I'm sure they, enjoy a lot of this, but like, man, this is some serious stuff right now.
Yeah, and there was some terrifying kind of themes in it, like and their names have just jumped out of my head. The big scary monsters that came to eat dying timelines.
The Loom.
The
Oh
Loom.
yeah, the loom.
They
The
were
Loom.
I was terrified. They were scary. These things were just like ripping people out of time quite aggressively.
Agreed. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I wonder if they just there's a few things that have maybe missed the mark in terms of this being a television for children, in the sense as well. Well, if I think that they were hoping as well that they could use a show geared more for a younger audience to also generate more revenue from merchandise, which they never made, right? Like, I think like maybe one Murph plushie kind of came out somewhere that at like a Comic-Con exclusive, but there could have been Protostar like toys and action figures. They pumped out one really mediocre video game during the first season, but they could have made so much money off marketing it. I mean, the diehard fans would have been snapping all that stuff up. So I don't know. I feel like maybe there was just a few missed opportunities there that could have made this a little bit more palatable for good old Paramount from a financial perspective.
Well, I'll add on to that to say that I think it actually kind of shows the recurring Star Trek problem they have, right? So if you look up to see what Star Trek is worth, the amounts vary greatly, but I see somewhere around like $1 billion. That contract that they sold for tells me like Star Trek is arguably the largest part of their portfolio. The Star Trek problem is that they've never really figured out how to market and monetize Star Trek. And I feel like it's because the people running the company often don't get why fans really like Star Trek. That's why these conventions do well and pop up, because those are more geared towards the fan. They constantly missed out on these what we would consider low-hanging fruit opportunities for things that we would say, here, take my money, let me buy this, and they'll come out with that maybe 5-7 years after someone else in another market has done a version of this. And they issued then a cease and desist order to them, and now they're the only ones making this other version that they finally get around to. I think it just kind of goes on to show that they've never really fully understood how to market Star Trek to the general audience, and that Star Trek's been more of a thing that sells itself to those who are into it.
Yeah. It's interesting, and Amy, I think you'll probably resonate with this a little bit, having just attended STLV. Star Trek is not so much the action figure collectible. I mean, that element is there, but that's kind of how Star Wars makes its money. Star Trek is a community, and a global one at that, right? Like, I'm sure there are, Star Wars has got that element too, but it's different for Star Trek. Like, we are networks of online podcasters, and we go to conventions together, and we have this huge global Trek family. And I wonder, is that why... Is that the secret sauce that Paramount just doesn't quite get? What do you think?
Right. And well, I think that they are relying on this, and maybe subconsciously, that Star Trek fans will always be there because that's how amazing the show is. Like, it's self-generating. And, because we're showing it to our kids, and they're coming up with shows like Prodigy. That it's this continual engine of, looking to the future and having this hope that, regenerates. And so I think they take advantage of it. And it's like, well, we don't need to come out with a action figure. We don't need to support any of the fans or give them what they want because they're always going to be there. And I feel that's sometimes just a little painful, especially like when they make more of a big deal of San Diego Comic-Con instead of STLV. That still is like an issue where it's like, this is a dedicated convention, but yet all the news, all the, big aha moments and dropping of previews happens at San Diego Comic-Con.
Yeah, well, because I mean, there's a bit of a dirty done then when you've ripped the license off of STLV too, right? Because we
Right.
did kind of used to get announcement there. Picard got announced there, but
Yes.
anyway, we've got a whole panel next week where we
Yeah.
can dive into that. Jonathan, interesting. So Sam in the chat said he just Googled the estimated value of the franchise to be somewhere in the order of 10.7 billion.
Oh,
Which is almost 6 billion more than what Disney paid for Lucasfilm.
wow.
Yeah. Which, I mean, and look at how Disney's milked that dry. But let's jump into chatting about. So we've got 5 episodes in this back half of the season, and for me, I think this is arguably probably like the whole season's great, but this was like the biggest chunk of like most exciting where I did binge because each episode just ended with me wanting to kind of watch the next one. So let's jump in. We're going to pull up. So we are starting with the second part of the 2-part Ascension. So this is episode 16. Now, I think the biggest thing we have here is this is the conclusion of the big battle with Essensia's giant ship, which I think had a name which escapes me at the moment. But we also found out about how she was using time as a weapon. She's got Wesley captured, so she's harvesting what they kind of call traveler tech. And then we've also got the big conclusion here as well, which was Zero's sacrifice of their corporeal body in order to save everyone. Jonathan, I'll start with you. What were your memories of this episode, and what stood out for you in Ascension?
I thought it was brilliantly written. I mean, I know I joked earlier about that being like a really rough scene, but it was like emotional and really well done. And again, something you wouldn't necessarily expect from like a show in theory geared towards kids. It had everything to do with the ideals of Star Trek of the needs of the many outweighing the needs of the few, and being willing to self-sacrifice to help your friends and family. It it was painful. It was painful, but beautiful at the same time. Like the way they lead up to it, it's clear that that's going to happen. And I guess you kind of know at some point he's going to lose his corporeal body. But the way they did it, I thought was, just a very epic moment, and well deserved of their character.
Yeah, you're right, and it's almost alluded to from the moment that Zero gets this corporeal body that it is limited. It cannot be repaired. This is a one-off for you. I initially was a little bit like, oh, I don't know how I feel about this change in the character. And then I became really excited about it. And then I felt like a deep sense of loss because it got taken away from us so quickly. Amy, did you think we were going to get more time with Zero in this form?
Yeah. So when Zero gets this, body, I felt like, because it was pretty early on, that this was his sacrifice because he had a choice to stay on the planet.
Mm.
And then he would never lose his body. So the fact that he continues on with his crew and with his team, like I felt like, oh, this is Zero's sacrifice. So when this is coming up, I'm like, wait a minute, he's already sacrificed. And now we're going to ask more of him. That was very impactful for me. I felt it a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is another thing where it must be quite heavy hitting for that younger audience as well, because it's sacrifice and it's loss, and there's almost like a sense of like death and mortality to it in a way. And even the scene, like the screenshot we've got up for those watching on YouTube, it's painful. Like Zero is like crawling through in pain, and you know that this could very much be the end. Is this scenes like this, like we're talking about with the loom, Jonathan, is this too confronting for the younger audience?
Well, so I think this probably goes over the heads of the kids.
Yeah,
This
right.
is, I mean, I guess I'd have to do a focus group or, ask Amy when she was watching with, her family to figure out here. But I think this probably goes over the heads of the kids. But like this, I want to point out the animation as he turns older, and the voice acting is just so well done that like, you feel it, and my first immediate, again, I was like, man, this is heavy, and having watched it again in preparation for this, I was reminded that Lower Decks did a version where they're going and like getting older, and like a person's leg literally like breaks and heals wrong and like rots off, and that is not painful and hurtful and as sacrificing as what we see here in Prodigy. And the amount of detail that they put into the aging, I think, is what makes it feel so real.
Yeah, and good point there as well about the voice performances. There's some top notch like vocal performances put into this as an animation, because in animation, especially in kids animation, it can be very easy to phone it in. But that's certainly not the case here. I just want to do a bit of a shout out. We've got Jim McMahon, who would normally be joining us live, is watching in the YouTube live chat, and we're getting some, both Jim and also Peter from the Trek Book Club in the chat. Everyone's just talking about how much they loved Zero's story arc in this season. We had a couple of other interesting moments in this episode as well. A few fun little references as well, like the Boothby Starburst maneuver, which I think, Jonathan, is another one of your millions and millions of like Easter eggs that we see. Too many to count, right? I considered, I was looking, when I was doing the research and putting together the pack for this episode, I was looking through, I think it was either Trek Culture or Trek Movie, and they've got, for each episode, just like almost a page of references that they found.
Yeah, there's a lot in there, and that's why I feel like it's something that, again, if this is geared towards kids, they're clearly not picking up on all these small little references, but it's so well written in. You don't feel like it's ham-fisted or shoved in your face, and not jokingly, right? So like Lower Decks, I feel like has a little bit easier because they can throw out these one-liners that mention various things, and do it in a joking fashion, where this is has to be tied into the storyline.
Other interesting story component from and what this introduced was, well, where is Essentia getting her power from? And again, I loved Essentia as an antagonist, just that purely like driven by this uncontrollable need to wipe out the Federation, this sense of revenge that almost nothing can satisfy, to the point where she's figured out how to capture Star Trek's version of Doctor Who and harness his power of thought as a weapon. Amy was that was epic, right?
It was. And I kept thinking, okay, she's at her all-time low. She can't go any further. And then she goes further. And, like I said, capturing Wesley. And like, I'm just like, no. And she just keeps going lower and lower. She was so intriguing and captivating. And the chemistry that she had with Gwen, I really enjoyed seeing those two go at it, with their words and everything.
Yeah, Jonathan, I think that was another example of a brilliant performance. That's that scene between, or a lot of the scenes between Wesley and Essentia, right, where she thinks she's got him, right?
Yep.
And he
Will
just,
Will Wheaton knocks this out of the park.
doesn't
It
he
like
ever?
I know he's like not wanted to do acting and he's questioned his own acting ability and whatever. Like he knocked this role out of the park. He handles the Star Trek technobabble like butter, so smooth. There's a line he says in the Ouroboros episode that we'll talk about a little bit later. I literally replayed that like 20 times and tried to say it at the speed that he does, and to this day I still cannot. I cannot, and I've tried multiple times, and he makes it flow so well. But let's mention here that Wesley doesn't necessarily really get captured. He allows himself to get captured as part of the plan.
That's
And then and
right.
mentioned like,
Yes.
wait, so we almost all died. And he goes, well, yeah, almost is doing a lot of heavy lifting. So he's got some great like hilarious lines, brings some seriousness to the situation with his abilities, and like how cool was it to get to see Wesley like use his time space thought powers to make weapons disappear that were ready to be fired at him, but then also adds this hilarious and levity, and just makes the character like very believable.
I
Well, what
agree.
I
I
think is
agree.
believable about it is that, it seems like, oh, he's surprised, but then he uses time to be like, oh, I took care of that. And so that's how I felt he was doing it. Like, essentially she was, pulling some punches there, but he was able to handle it. And that's what I loved about them two together.
Mm. He's given some great content from the writers to work with, isn't he? And anyone who follows me on the network knows that I am a huge Wesley Crusher fan. And having read Will Wheaton's book only in the last year, and hearing about how painful it was for him to, well, first he left the show a little bit arrogant, a little bit young, a little bit cocky, but then hearing how painful that journey was for him over the years, and having his scenes cut and from Nemesis and all that kind of stuff. And Star Trek has always been his family, though. So for him to finally come back, and for the character of Wesley to get justice, right? We're finally, I was disappointed that we didn't get to see him become a Starfleet officer, but if they were going to really lean into him as this traveler, this ultimate non-corporeal being of sorts, this was it. This was what the character needed. Yeah, Jonathan, do you feel that this was justice for Wesley?
Yeah, this is definitely a combination of like Voyager's season 7.5, and then the Wesley Crusher story, and I loved it. I loved it. We definitely, everyone had said for a long time, we need more Wesley Crusher story. We need to figure out what's going on there. They've opened up this door that anything's possible, and then all we got was this quick little scene in Picard that frankly left us with more questions than answers. And so this whole the way he gets introduced and everything that happens throughout the season, I love it. It is justice for him. I mean, like for Janeway, her character, to be saying at one point, like, he asks, oh, well, how's my mom? Well, you should ask her, like, reach out to her, especially, knowing his abilities, like, take a moment, go see your mom. And then, like, Picard makes you think like, man, what kind of mother is the doctor there? That her family's all split up. She's hiding things behind the scene, but then you get to see here like this gives her like alleviates any of that kind of unnecessary or wrongful guilt on her, because you get to see the fuller backstory when you combine it, particularly with everything we know from Picard.
Mm.
Well, and it makes me wonder, like, when they wrote this, Wesley Crusher storyline, had they already seen that Picard was getting the send off from everyone except Wesley? Like, I don't
Mm.
know. I just feel like, with Picard and especially season 3, everyone got their conclusion. And you're right. With Nemesis, he got the raw deal there.
Well, I think that was Alex Kurtzman. I mean, I don't know this for a fact, but that would be my guess. Alex Kurtzman essentially gets to decide which characters are allowed to be used in which series. He
Mm,
was the one who authorized Wesley Crusher to be used first for
right.
Picard, and then I'm sure it had to have given the green light to say, "Okay, you've got this great story for Prodigy. Go ahead. You got him, and run with it." I don't think we'll get any more Wesley Crusher going forward, which is a
Right.
shame because Will Wheaton kills it again. Like, just plays this role like I don't think anyone else could.
Hmm.
Totally. You mentioned the Beverly Crusher scene there as well. I don't know about anyone else, but all the way on the other side of the world here in Australia, when that happened, I heard Christos squeal from somewhere. So
Yes.
he was just the first person I thought of. Followers of the network, if you know our dear friend Christos, What's the Tea Bev is his show, and he is Beverly obsessed. And I've
Yes.
since seen him raving about it in public forums.
Yes.
Before we jump onto the next episode, Jim has just jumped on my earlier comment about Wesley being Star Trek's Doctor Who and just says he would love to see a version of Wesley traveling around in the TARDIS having adventures. And hey, Jim, who knows? We got that very odd San Diego Comic-Con panel of Doctor Who and Star Trek, and they produced that very strange, what was it, that Friendship is Universal video. So, hey, I know, I reckon if Russell T Davies and Kurtzman could get away with it, they would, but someone would have to sell to Paramount or someone would have to sell to Disney for that to happen. Let's move on to the next episode. So, Brink. Now, this one, it took me a little while to sort of remember what we had going on here. So we've got a covert mission taking place. We've got flashbacks revealing how Essentia captured Wesley, and he's warning her about tampering with space-time, and again, her being blinded with her need for revenge. And then we've got gathering intel on So basically, they're trying to figure out, okay, what is this time tech that Essentia has? And there's a whole bunch of mixtures of what's going on. There's a bit of espionage. We've got a bit of slapstick humor. We've got the cloaking bubble malfunctions. I don't know if everyone remembers that. They had the weird cloaking bubbles in this episode, which was very comedic. And actually, there's something I want to touch on, because there's where we've got the mixture. I think that it's moments like that where you're reminded that this is a little bit more of a children's program.
Mm-hmm.
But Jonathan, how do you think those moments are handled, right? Because we've got this very serious story arc and all this other stuff going on around it that's quite intense. And then you've got the wacky, zany espionage mission with the cloak that keeps malfunctioning. How do you feel they handle that balance?
I think they keep it fun and playful, and I think they handle the balance really well because of that's not the only cast, right? We see really in this season. There's the kids cast, and then there's the adults, and we do see that they act differently. But then we also see that there's this great relationship and conversation that happens where they can each learn from each other. Where Chakotay's letting Dahl know that you don't always need to be the one in charge, and sometimes it's better to be the number one, to be there supporting the person that you actually believe in, as opposed to trying to take control of everything else. And then Janeway learning from the kids about sometimes you're not necessarily going to always follow the rules. I don't know that Janeway needs that reminder, but you get to see this great separation. So when they're doing these things where it's a little bit more silly, you notice it's the kid characters who are always doing that, and it's really like a handful of those kid characters that tend to be more playful or sillier, like Jankum Pog. He's not going to be the more serious one ever, but is there when you need him to be. So they all have their individual little roles where they can be more serious when they need to be, but at their core, again, they're all kids and not 100% confident. They're still in training. I mean, now we eventually will see them becoming ensigns, but they're still learning.
But But then you've also got some. I mean, actually, I'll pick up on something you said there as well, which is how the sillier moments are coming from the kids, and I think there's some subtle reminders from time to time that our core cast are kids. Like they're teenagers. They're not, and I think they try to really sort of play on that contrast of having Janeway and her crew as the serious Starfleet adults with these kids who are just they just want to be grown-ups and be part of the adventure, but they also do wacky crazy things along the way because they don't have that same sense of sort of Starfleet duty and everything instilled in them. There's a bit
Well,
more.
I'd like to add, if I could.
Yeah, go.
I think they do a really good job in, here's the realm of the kids, and then you have the storyline of, the big strategy and the adult conversations. But where I think they overlap, if we were to do a Venn diagram, is the crew doing things together, supporting themselves. I'm going to back you up. I'm going to support you. And that togetherness is where it's like, I feel like with the adults, it's like, here's all the strategy, but in the end, I'm going to be with you. And with the kids, it's like, oh, we're being fun, but in the end, I'm going to be with you. So this idea of being a crew and together bleeds through both of those genres, I guess, of this episodes, or
and that sense of friendship and loyalty is really strong in this episode as well, because the new character Margelle, still the best name ever, so because of what they're doing, there's a part of the episode where it's believed that Starfleet will disavow their actions because it's a covert operation, and so Margelle resigns from Nova Squadron, which is a big point of pride for her, to join their mission too. Jonathan, it's something we haven't actually touched on. So we have Margelle was a whole new part of the scene, right? So how did you find Margelle's arc up to this point?
So I think what's happened is that Star Trek writers have realized Vulcans are the perfect comedic foil for certain situations. And so that's why we saw a Vulcan character get added in Lower Decks. And I think that's why we saw a Vulcan character get added here into Prodigy, because they are really like a very easy, perfect foil for some of these great comedic moments that they're trying to put together, but also having this kind of seriousness and logical viewpoint at the same time. I thought her character, loved the name, obviously, in an ode to Gene's wife. Her character is exactly what you expect of a Vulcan character. So starts off a little more serious, the more time spent around non-Vulcans, becomes a little bit more softer and willing to be forced out of the convention. So I'm not exactly sure which episode it is, but they're forced to fly crazy. Don't follow the book. Don't do any, alpha maneuver, delta maneuver. Do something crazy and erratic because the system knows all the various maneuvers. And so at one point, Magellan's character does a circle, and Dahl's like, "Really, a circle? That's all you got?" And then, pulls off this various type maneuver that causes the two vehicles to crash into each other. So I mean, it's kind of exactly what I expect what they would do of Vulcan characters, but I'm glad to see that they have finally figured out how to use Vulcans in that sort of way, which we hadn't seen in other Star Treks in a more regular kind of style.
Yeah, they love to play on the hard Vulcan character that softens over time and starts to display an air of humanity. Did you pick up on that as well with Majel, Amy?
Yeah, I felt she was just very on the nose and very one note of this is logical, but I see what you're going with that. And it just kept hitting over and over. And then it took me out of it where it's like, okay, this is for kids. They're learning what Vulcans are. So I had to give it its grace for what it is.
And so there's actually there's two missions really going on in this episode as well. So you've got Gwyn's group with the sort of comedic slapstick covert operation going on to get information, and then you've also, I think, got the rescue of, is it Gwyn's father happening in this as well. So the younger version of him, who has, even though we saw him as kind of the big bad in the first season, he's a much lighter, more gentle version of himself in this season as well. But then we also sort of see what Essentia has done to Solom amongst all this silliness. When they first beam down, we actually see a population of people that's been quite subdued, and there's all this fear and this cowering and stuff going on as well. Look, I've heard a lot about sort of the Valnacut and how they're presented, but they've played a major role in the arc over these 2 seasons. Jonathan, what are your thoughts on the Valnacut as a civilization, as a species, and how they've kind of played a pivotal role throughout these 2 seasons?
So I think it's a great new species to introduce, right? We don't see them in any other Star Trek. It's the first time we're introduced to the species. I think they make them look great. They're every character, even in the background where you're seeing, hundreds of them. I think they all looked really well designed, and like they just were top quality animation that, again, like I don't necessarily expect from a children's story. So that I thought was really well done. Their history and being tied in, I like that they're essentially doing how societies can be overcome by this nefarious character and change society and hold back progress, and so you have to rise up and fight for freedom, kind of a classic Star Trek story of freedom. I definitely think there could be some more fleshed out of that, but when you look back on this, what they were able to do in 40 episodes, I think is quite amazing, with the amount of story, background, and new species that we get introduced to.
Yeah, they've really created quite a rich lore here, which, again, there's a sense of injustice that there's been only 2 seasons of it, because it feels like there's a lot more to go. Amy, what are your thoughts off the back of what Jonathan said?
Yeah, I feel like because of the time travelness of the series, we're sort of getting to see 2 Valnacots, where one is, we're going to destroy the Federation because they, tried to wipe us out and blah, blah, blah. Or one where, the father now is like, well, we can work with the Federation and not be destroyed. So we're getting these 2 perspectives, and I'm not quite sure which one we want to believe, but that only enriches, the storytelling and which path. It's a choice. And we see that with Essentia and with the father.
One final thing that we get a hint of in the episode Brink is Gwyn in a more commanding leadership position as well. This is the first time where and I think there's actually a line from Dal in this episode where you see Dal sort of moving back. He's less like, I'm the captain, I'm the one in charge. And Gwyn is quite clearly providing a little bit more leadership in this, which is something which comes to fruition towards the end. Let's jump over to the next episode. So, Touches of Grey, which is the penultimate episode, if you will, before Ouroboros, which is the 2-part season finale. Now, there's a lot of focus on Admiral Janeway in this episode. And there is a little, I think there's a little bit of a rescue mission going on, if memory serves me correctly here as well. So they're going into Solom's the Waste. Janeway and the Doctor engage Essentia directly, while Wesley and Chakotay work on freeing the prisoners. I'm trying to remember which ones were the prisoners. It's all merged into one. I should have put more detail onto these slides.
Well, the kids end up getting captured.
Yes, I had a feeling it must have been them. Yes. But this was very interesting to sort of see that they were captured, and we got to see a little bit more of the adults in in this episode. So, Jonathan, how did you find when we kind of switched perspectives a little bit? Because there was often a bit of A plot, B plot, C plot kind of stuff going on between the adult crew of the Voyager and then what's going on with our core cast of
I
heroes.
loved this. I loved this. I mean, there was actually at one point where I was watching, I'm like, wait, this is still Prodigy I'm watching, right? Like, what happened to the kids? The kids are like, oh yeah, there is a good sequence of time that goes beyond where you don't see the kids involved. And let's just talk quickly for a moment about the name of this episode. The title of this episode, I think, is brilliantly done. So it has multiple meanings to me, at least. Touch of gray, an allusion to that they're all older. Touch of gray as that, this is a gray area, murky area that they're working in, and that, they're not supposed to be involved in the Society of Solemn because they're not members of the Federation, but they're going to do what they need to do to save their crew. I love it. I love everything about this episode. I think this is where I feel like, oh, we're getting our season 7.5 of Voyager. The only missing part is I'm like, man, if we could have got a little, Garrett Wong or someone else from the Voyager crew that we hadn't seen brought back otherwise. So like Harry Kim's character, that would have been great. We saw Tom Paris in Lower Deck, so I feel like we got a little something out of that. It was really just great to see like the Voyager, I don't want to say top tier cast, that's not the appropriate way to say, but just to see Captain Janeway, the Doctor, and Chakotay together, and then also the interactions with Wesley Crusher and or Admiral Janeway, I should say. Their interactions, we never had seen them interact ever before, but it was nice to see that the way they interact, that they clearly know each other more than just know of each other. They actually know each other and are familiar with each other.
Yeah, it's a fun way to kind of do a Voyager season 7.5, because I think there's a little bit here of what Patrick Stewart was talking about when he was convinced to come back and do Picard. Is like, originally he was like, oh, it doesn't have to be a reunion, right? It's all this time has passed and they live in this big galaxy. People aren't just all going to naturally like wind up accidentally crossing paths for one big adventure. But still, here you get to see, like, of course, Janeway is going to try and rescue Chakotay, and that's how Chakotay winds up there. And of course, her faithful hologram will be along for the ride. Amy, would you have liked maybe more Voyager cameos, or was it good just kind of getting this, 7.5 as Jonathan calls it, with the cast members that we got?
Yeah, I definitely wanted to see more. I mean, because there's a lot that we, would love to see. And I just felt like it was one step removed with, bringing in Wesley Crusher, that the point that they had in common was Beverly Crusher, so Janeway knew Beverly. And I loved that when she was talking about, Beverly to Wesley, like, it just reminded me of when they're at STLV and talking about them as friends. Like, it just seemed, I loved it. So I felt like I wanted to see more like within the first realm and not a second realm where Wesley has never met Admiral Janeway.
I feel like this was setting up a possibility for a Janeway miniseries or a Janeway movie. I know Kate Mulgrew is willing to do, additional Star Trek, but only if it holds the Janeway character up to a certain standard. So it has to be meaningful, and it can't just be the same old, and it has to be something that would make sense for the Janeway character. Clearly, there's many paths for that. Obviously, I want more than less, so I would love to see, a series or a mini series, but it wouldn't surprise me if maybe what we can get out of this is a movie like we're going to get for Section 31.
Which I would totally be here for.
Yeah, I mean, the more I can get, the happier I am.
Yep.
So I'm touching on a couple of the other character moments that come through this, because this is it's not really kind of a standalone episode. I don't think there's any standalone episodes in this final part. This kind of contains stories, but all the characters are getting their development. Something that I just picked up on through reading a few articles while you were talking is that Essentia is really being dug deep into this. Well, there's no redemption for you because you're clearly past that. But there's an interesting thing because they play so much with time travel and timelines in this season. There's a bit of redemption that comes through this in terms of Essentia's younger self in this. Jonathan, how did you find that as a different way to kind of play on the classic redemption arc of the baddie? Because Star Trek often likes to sort of say, hey, no one's really bad. They're just a sum of their experiences. So how did you find that as a way
I'm
of doing
glad they didn't do that fully in this one. I like the way that they approached it. I mean, as you may recall when I was talking about Maul's character in Discovery, that clearly she could be saved and redeemed. I hated that. So I love here it's like that this character is not redeemable. She's past the point of redemption, and that the only point that's redeemable is literally her past before she was past the point of redemption. So I thought they handled that well, trying to keep true to the Star Trek story of that, like, no one is truly evil. Everyone has good and bad. And I thought they actually did that really well with Iltheron's character, right? Season 1, he's this horrible, mean, terrible person, where here in season 2, he's a political prisoner that's trying to save his society and get him to work with the Federation.
Yeah, and there's an interesting point there is, I guess, maybe it's that no one really kind of starts out evil or bad. And that was what I was saying before. Star Trek likes to sort of play on that whole people are a sum of their experiences.
Yes.
Amy, how did you find that kind of play on older self, younger self? Because we see that from two angles, as Jonathan was just saying, with both Iltheron and Essentia.
Well, yeah, and that's sort of that balance between, learning about this now species. Like we get to see them, okay, one path, they are, going to kill every Federation and they're to blame for all of our woes and this revenge society, or we can see this. And so that balance between good and evil not only happens in the time telling story, but then in the characters of Essentia and, the father. And I think it's just so, like, when you look at that and the parallels that they've written in the storyline, it's amazing writing.
Absolutely. Couple of tidbits for this episode as well, which I've just pulled up in front of me. So this is the birth of Dirk Danger in this episode as well, by the way. So this is where the Doctor considers the title of his new holo novel as Mission Assignment Solemn, The Adventures of Dirk Danger, and the Dome of Loom and Doom. And this is something I just picked up on, and there's a picture of it here that I'm just looking at. In a franchise first, we see Janeway typing a captain's log. Does anyone remember seeing that?
What? No.
Yeah, apparently.
Is it on a clear pad?
It is. So I'll have to grab the screenshot up and send it around. But actually, you know what? That's literally all right. She's literally typing it into a laptop. Let me just actually see if I can pull that up. Actually, I can. Wait there 2 seconds.
Wow.
Well, it wouldn't be the first time Janeway has manually written a log. After her encounter with the Borg, she made a specific point of writing her log on paper.
Yeah. So this is a Trek movie recap of the episode. And there she is, like, with her MacBook Pro open, 24th century edition, typing a captain's log. How very, very bizarre. It's funny the things you blink and miss sometimes in this show. And I think that speaks to how rewatchable it is too. Like, every time I sit down and do research to do this panel, I'm like, geez, I need to go back and watch that episode again because I feel like I missed 1,000,001 different things. Something else they say here as well I found funny was that Chakotay brings Janeway her old USS Voyager badge, but in episode 205 we saw that she already had it in her collection. Perhaps he regifted her own badge. So unfortunately, yeah, for as tight as the writing is, you're always going to get those little oddities in continuity here and there.
Well, that could be the badge from the other timeline, right?
Mm.
It could be. It could
Where
be.
he was, set aside. So I don't know.
Yeah, and they actually there's I can't remember what episode it is, but they actually make a little bit of a joke about the different styles of comm badges. Because doesn't Chakotay, when he puts that badge on, makes reference to the fact the first time they ever saw it was when future Janeway came back in Endgame. I can't remember where that was, but he does make a reference to it. Hey, do you remember the first time we saw this when your future self was wearing it? Amy, do you remember that?
It sounds familiar, yes, but I
Yeah.
can't pinpoint it.
Yeah. So it was there. It was there.
Yeah.
Well, and I like the one-off line that they use to justify why there are all the different badges, right? So Jellicoe says we can't even afford to upgrade half the badges of the fleet. I'm thinking like, man, how bad are things if you can't use your replicators for new badges?
I mean, it's either that or it's uniforms, which they're constantly changing around, but much to cosplayers' delight everywhere. All right, let's jump into Ouroboros, or however you pronounce it, parts 1 and 2. I only know, so I know of this name, Ouroboros, from Red Dwarf. If anyone has ever seen Red Dwarf, there's a Red Dwarf episode named this, where Dave Lister finds out, the main character of Red Dwarf finds out he is his own father. and this is the infinity, it's the snake eating its own tail kind of symbol. And so he was the character of Dave Lister was found in a box with that symbol on it, and then he found out he's his own dad.
Do we know what Ouroboros means? I feel like it's a term I've heard, but I can't place it.
Yeah, it's like an infinity kind of term. So it's used to describe a symbol of a snake eating its own tail.
Okay.
And so it very much plays on the very much cause and effect that kind of goes on throughout this whole season. Jonathan, in terms of this as a two-part finale, and we'll sort of look at both episodes as one here, you were saying something very interesting to me before we came on air. Now, it's very much uncertain whether there will be any more Prodigy. It could be more likely and not that there will not be. So not only is this a season finale, but it is a series finale, as you put it to me. So how does this stack up as the latter?
I think they did again a very amazing, well job on writing and putting this together to the point where it makes me wonder, like, did they know that this was going to be the final season, or is this again just the new way that they are now writing shows, that they assume that every season could be the last? This two-part episode. Obviously, it does what Star Trek loves to do. We involve time travel, but they have these wonderful flashbacks and tie-in moments that you would only expect to see in a series finale. And they do it very elegantly and in a way that, like, it made me wish Discovery had picked up a little bit from this. There is no part that makes me feel, man, I wish I got more of this. Man, they left this too close, or they left this too open. They could have done a little bit more here. Even like, again, then I feel like their attention to detail of putting the kids in this style of uniform when they take off on the ship, so that way it aligns with the Picard timeline, where Picard flashing back, this is the uniform they had right around the times of the attack on Mars colony.
Right, yeah, and it's interesting you say that. Was there anything kind of left unsaid or undone? No, not really, right? So it's been positioned as a way like, hey, if there's more of it, we're going to get this great new space adventure with a new crew on a new ship, and that'll be amazing. Otherwise, we've actually been told a very well contained 40 episode story, and it's just dawned on me why we've got Ouroboros as that kind of infinity title for this, because really at the end of the day, the main thing that they were trying to do was get the protostar back to Tars Lamora, back to where it was found at the beginning of season 1, episode 1. Despite everything else going on around, what they needed to do was to do that and fix the timeline, get rid of the loom, set everything back the way it was meant to be. Amy, did you find this as satisfying as we did?
Yes, absolutely. My favorite ending episodes is, of course, TNG, All Good Things. And we get that time travel of the past, present, and future. And Prodigy does this so well because we've been talking about the past and getting Chakotay, and then we went to the future, and we've got all of these timelines that season 2 has brought us into, and where we are concerned about where Essentia is, where the father is, where is Gwyn, which time is she in. Like, we care about each of these time periods and how they are so expertly woven together to come to the one prime timeline, as we like to call it, was so well done. And we got to flash back and remember everything from before because of the jumps in the timeline, which is the best way to have a series or season finale, is you remember where you were and now where you've come to.
And it's so brilliantly woven together. Like, even you've got Wesley's there all along reminding us that this is a plan, and then our minds are really blown by the fact that actually it was never Chakotay who sent the protostar back to Tars Lamora.
Mm-hmm.
It was these characters, and it was always these characters, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm speaking to any Red Dwarf fans out there still. This is Dave Lister becoming his own dad all over again. Amy, Jonathan, if you haven't watched it, go watch it. It's great. But then you've got all these big action set pieces happening around this very satisfying conclusion to the story. Like, at the beginning, Essentia is doubling down because the Valnacut have turned against her, so she starts firing off this wormhole weapon left, right, and center. And then still underneath it all, you've got this, you've got the action, plus you've got the really intelligent story happening at the same time. So, Jonathan, I think you've kind of been alluding to that, right? We're talking about how sharp the writing is in this. It's actually, for a kids program, it's very intelligent and it's very smart, and I think it actually treats the younger audience as an intelligent species, which is what some of the best kids shows do, right?
Absolutely. And what I really like what they do here with the ending is there's that false ending, right? At the middle part of Ouroboros Part 2, where everything's kind of wrapped up and you feel satisfied and I've got a good story and conclusion. And then they throw in the attack on Mars colony and then give you this whole additional story where we get to see Janeway come out, and then they're mentioning about the Romulans not being able to be evacuated, and Janeway objecting to the stopping of that. We're not going to explore anymore where we can't afford it. So this, like, they give you a full satisfied story, and then like, no, we're not done. We got a little bit more for you, and that little bit more they throw in there is really well written. Ties in Prodigy into the Picard and TNG and Voyager timelines and lower decks and even short treks in a way that I didn't know you could do that with just a couple few minutes and a little bit of animation.
Exactly how I felt. Exactly. Yeah.
I was so shocked by that inclusion of the Children of Mars kind of tie in right at the end. I'm like, wait, hang on, they're showing. I'm like, wow, it's the terrorist attack, the simp terrorist attack on Mars. We're actually getting to see that, and this is where you even get some what Star Trek does incredibly well, which is a bit of that kind of current social political commentary where you see, hey, this has happened, and then Starfleet kind of pulls back on all its good. It's not reaching out into the stars anymore, becoming a little bit more insular, a little bit more, nationalistic, if you will. Amy, did you pick up on some of that, parallel commentary to today's world?
No, I didn't, but now I am seeing it as you are describing it.
I mean, that could just be my interpretation.
And you feel it. And that's why I feel when I saw this, I'm like, that was a great ending, but oh my goodness, they left us wanting more. And I can be completely satisfied and be good, and we heard Kate Mulgrew, all of them, you fans, you can make it happen. You can save Prodigy. You can give us another season. And here's this little tidbit of hope. Can we fans make a season 3 of Prodigy? That's where we're at with that last little bit.
I know. Well, look, if
so
any...
I want to say two things if I can. One about the Valna Cot. I feel like they're in this season 2 story. They're humanity. They're a foil for humanity, right? I think the ultimate storyline is with good leaders who are open to new ideas and progress, your society can thrive and be free and progress. With leaders who are hell-bent on revenge and being insular, your society will be suppressed, less advanced, and just dark. And this is the story that they're trying to, tell us, that Star Trek's always trying to tell us, like, pick good leaders, go in the right direction, move towards progress. And again, they do it in a way that's not like beating you over the head. So I feel like it's well written in that regard. The other thing, as far as season 3 of Prodigy, I just don't see how that is feasible. And here's partially why, especially with that whole addition of that. The additional ending, right? The even more satisfying ending where they do the tie-in with all the other Star Treks and the Mars. That's all Star Trek IP, right? That's all Star Trek intellectual property. They're not going to allow Netflix to take over Star Trek IP and run free and wild with it. If they had left it off as maybe an individual thing, or were maybe to continue like sending the kids off on a ship to go explore somewhere that hasn't been explored, maybe I could see, but then I can't imagine Netflix wanting to even make a show where their hands are super tied. You can't create anything new, can't affect the Star Trek timeline. So their story writing is going to be very handcuffed, right? Where obviously the kind of stories we really want, you're going to be playing around with Star Trek intellectual property, and they set this up to really be tied in with everything else. So it's almost surprising that they even allowed it to be sold to Netflix to begin with. And obviously that was done for financial and tax reasons. But the way everything's done, it's like, this is clearly part of Star Trek. They all belong together. I can't see it getting splintered off. I just don't see how that would be possible or even allowed by like Alex Kurtzman, who's the showrunner. Netflix is not going to go to CBS every time they want to, decisions on their show.
The only hope I have, and I totally agree with everything you said, and you and I talked about a little of this before we went to air, Jonathan. The only hope I have is that the pure success of season 2 on Netflix, right? Like it was hitting top 10 ratings on a global scale at times too. Like my only hope is that will drive the right decisions, but I also agree it's from a business point of view, in terms of how fractured everything is at Paramount right now, it's highly unlikely.
And I took my hope came out of that if this series does as well as it appears to have done, and the fans love it as much as it appears that they do, that this tells Star Trek, we know you don't want to oversaturate yourself at any given time with Star Trek, but all you're about to have left is Strange New Worlds. Lower Decks is coming to its final season. We will have Academy coming out at some point here, so we'll have information on that. I'm hoping, and obviously the Section 31 movies is done, it's just not yet released. I'm hoping that this will open the door for a Voyager style miniseries, because Prodigy was all Voyager, right? From the beginning through the end. This is a love letter to Voyager in a way that Lower Decks is mostly a love letter to TNG. That's where my hope comes out of this, is that the folks over at CBS will say, hey, there's a lot of interest in this. What can we do out of this? Because obviously all the Voyager actors would be in on this and want to get involved. I think it just comes down to what's the story going to be, and for them it's going to be the money and episodes. I'm hoping that they approach it in a somewhat similar way that they did for Picard and or Prodigy. That Prodigy was, all right, the season's going to be 20 episodes. That's not normal these days. They much have shorter episodes. Again, it's animated in a shorter episode, so ultimately kind of works out to 10. But Picard being, all right, we're going to do 3 seasons. We're committing to 3 seasons, and we're going to do X number of episodes at least per season. I would love to see some sort of, commitment or something. Say, all right, we're going to do 20 episodes or 30 episodes of a Voyager / Janeway kind of storyline.
One can only hope. One thing I will mention, we are going to have, there is another new show coming, which got announced at San Diego Comic-Con, which is Tawny Newsom's show that she's developing, which is a live-action comedy series. It's almost like some kind of Starfleet reality show. It sounds very odd, but I'm hoping that it'll be
titled
good.
Yet, right?
No, I don't think there's a title. No, it's just a project at this point, but it's been greenlit, so there is more unique and different experimental Trek on the way. I just want to wrap up with one thing on this episode, and that is the actual ending which we get after all the attack on Mars is we get, all right, well, but we're going to send this younger crew out because we can. And hey, guess what? Gwen's going to be in charge. So, Amy, what did you think of that kind of arc for Gwen and Dal comfortably taking his seat as number 1 next to Captain Gwen?
Yeah, when Dal saw the future, he peaked while he was in that temporal thing. I was like, what did he see? What? And it was alluding. So by the time this happened, I was okay with it because I love Captain Dal. I think he's the best, and he's, just over the top, but is learning. I love his arc with it. And then for him to not end up as captain, I thought was just very well written, because I didn't think Gwen was going to take it, but the way that they came together sort of as co-captaincy, because she's going to run by everything to Dal. So it's not her and number 1. It's sort of a them as captain is how I'm reading it.
Interesting. Did you get a similar kind of vibe, Jonathan?
I leaned more into where he's her Chakotay. And Chakotay has a conversation with him at one point where he says something to the effect of that, like, listen, I was always trying to fight and didn't really know what I was fighting for, or something to that effect. He tells a story until he knew who to fight for, and it was to fight for and alongside Janeway. And I see that of Dal, right? Dal is this rambunctious person who, is not really fully confident. I mean, you hear him doubting himself multiple times, or admitting to, I think you hear 10 times, he hadn't read the temporal mechanics manual. Get around and read that, buddy. Obviously, it's very important here. But I took him more as the Chakotay to Janeway. So he's, there's definitely this co-conversation going on, but there was also that with Chakotay and Janeway. So Gwen is the more analytic, thinking ahead kind of person. Obviously, she's thrust in this position, but it's alluded to that multiple times, even earlier, where she makes the decision to split everybody up so that way we won't leave anyone behind. And that ultimately ended up being like not the right decision, but they made it through it by working together.
Mm. I saw a few parallels to almost the ending of Picard as well, with Captain Seven and First Officer Raffi kind of taking control of the Enterprise G. There's been a lot of interesting little kind of parallels like that throughout all of these, where there's similar kind of stories and characters happening across all the different shows at the same time. All I know is that I will hold out hope, because if we do wind up getting the adventures of Captain Gwen aboard the Protostar, I'm sure it will be amazing, because they can take it in so many interesting places now, because now they are going to be still a young crew who are figuring out who they are in this great big old crazy galaxy, but at the same time they're not going to be on the run. Like, they've got their own ship, they're in command, they can go and have all kinds of crazy, wacky, maybe some more standalone kind of adventures as well. But who knows? Quick round of final thoughts for Prodigy Season 2. Amy, anything that you feel like you haven't been able to express yet?
You know, I always say what my favorite Trek is the one that's currently on. So right now, Prodigy is my favorite. It is so well done. And the writers and the animation and the voice work, like, really seriously. And the story that it's telling of being together, and especially it was just really hit on, you must remain together. And I feel like that's where we can learn and build this Star Trek community, is by remaining together. Prodigy just reminds me of why I love Star Trek, is because of all of the relationships and friendships that have been built because of this love of this show, and how it just goes deeper. And Prodigy is a beautiful kid show, but it just means so much more to me as a fan. So,
Jonathan, what about you?
I will second that as well. I think it's, again, a very well done show. It far exceeded my expectations when they said they were going to do a Star Trek show for kids. Again, what they were able to pull off in these 40 episodes is amazing. Again, I'm going to give a huge nod to Will Wheaton. His voice work is amazing. The techno babble rolls off his tongue. I love everything that they did with this series, and it is really about togetherness and community, which it's probably more so than any other Star Trek show. Reinforces that constantly, that this is about everyone together, that it's not one individual. And I guess I'm just looking forward to hear more about the adventures of Dirk Danger.
Aren't we all? Yeah, this for me was, and I've talked about this before, it was the show I was least excited about, because there was a while there where it just seemed like we were getting new announcements. There was so much new Trek coming. I was like, oh, I love that they're doing this, and I'll probably watch it, but I was neither here nor there. And then it wound up being this wonderful gift that the show's creators gave to us, that is going to be really, really special to us for many, many years to come, whether it continues or not. And I've loved what I have seen with this, which I was talking about at the beginning of the show, which is the almost uniform love of the series. I'm not seeing hate and divisive comments and people who should just, if you don't like it, please just don't watch and shut the hell up.
Yeah.
Kind of stuff going on social media. Is it perfect? Of course not. But it's about as close to it as we have gotten in a very long time with Star Trek. So a big thank you to all of them, and a big thank you to both of you for joining the panel today, and for everyone else who's joined our panel series, including Haven, Jim, and Mahendran. That's what all we've got time for. Quick whip around. Amy, where can people find you online?
Well, you can find me if you listen to a couple of podcasts here on the network, All Good Things and the Union Federation. And in a couple weeks, we will be starting our YouTube channel, The View Screen. So looking forward to that. September 8th, I believe, is when we start going. You can also find me in our Discord group and on our Facebook group, the BQN Collective.
Amazing. I'm so excited for the return of the View Screen. I never knew I needed like a Star Trek morning show style, like Today Show style. But hey,
we've got some good guests coming up. Yes.
I've heard. Kelvin's
well, maybe that's Tommy Houston's going to steal your idea. That's what I think. Tommy Houston's going to steal your idea. That'll be the new Star Trek show. And folks can find me on Facebook just under my name, Dirk Danger. No, I'm kidding. Jonathan Michael Snow.
Yeah, just be careful what happens if you Google Dirk Danger anywhere else. And for me, you can find me across the network. You can find my other show, The Bargain Bin Gamer, spelled Gaymer, on YouTube and Twitch. And my main show, The Trexperts Quiz, which is back for its third season. And we have got our final round of our Prodigy Championship happening next weekend, featuring our current Prodigy champions, Giraffe from Strange New Pod and Ashlyn from the Duros Sisters. So you can find that by searching for the Trexperts Quiz on YouTube or anywhere you get podcasts. That's it for today. The Hive Mind will be back at the same time next week for an STLV recap with our host and patron collective who attended STLV. We've been promised all kinds of photos and videos. It's going to be like a slide night. I don't know if anyone ever used to have slide nights, but we used to have slide nights in Australia when I was a kid. if you ever went on holidays, you came back, you got the slides done, put them up on the big screen. So join in for that, and we'll have more Hive Mind coming up soon. We'll be doing recaps when Lower Decks starts too. So that's it for now. Thanks for joining, everyone. Thanks again, Amy. Thanks again, Dirk. Peace out, live long and prosper. We'll see you next time.